Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? But you would give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? You can see straight through my life. Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? But you would give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, look, I wish I'd find. Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? You can see straight through my light. Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I'd give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd.
Okay, hello everyone. We are back for some more Revan. We are going to try, I keep doing this, we. I am the one doing the reading. Um, so I am going to try to get through chapters 22 through 24, so that's another 3. That should be roughly 15 pages, so not too bad. These have been all pretty consistent 5-page chapters, so we'll just jump right on into it and see how far we get. Chapter 22. Scourge knew he had to act quickly. With long, rapid strides, he marched from the cave to the waiting speeder and took to the air, heading back to Kos City. He'd promised the Jedi he would return to the cave within 1 day, but that wasn't his biggest concern. Seshel had set up the meeting and maneuvered Scourge into taking Murtaugh with him. No doubt he was eagerly waiting for the security chief's report on what happened. He had to find Seshel and deal with him before the advisor became suspicious. Seshel would most likely be at the Nexus room, enjoying a selection of fine wines while waiting for Murtaugh to call in. As a Sith Lord, Scourge had access to the facility, but he didn't want to confront Seshel in a public setting. He brought his speeder in for a landing a block away from the club, jumped out and walked to the building. The slave on duty greeted him as he entered the lobby. "Welcome, my lord," the young human said, bowing low. "I have a message for Seshel," Scourge told him. "Of course, my lord. Follow me." As the slave turned to enter the club, Scourge reached out a hand and grabbed him by the shoulder. "I did not say I wished to speak with him," he hissed. "I said I had a message." Forgive me, master," the slave stammered, obviously terrified, "but please tell me what you wish me to do." Wait until I leave, Scourge explained slowly, as if he were talking to a simpleton. Then tell Seshel that Murtagh needs to meet him. He'll know where. He stared down at the slave. Do you understand? The slave nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Do not tell him I was here, Scourge instructed. Do not mention me at all. Simply deliver the message. If you fail me, I will have them flay the flesh from your bones. They both knew it was not an idle threat. By right, Scourge could inflict any punishment he chose on a disobedient slave. Of course, the young man would also be punished if anyone discovered he had lied to a member of the club, but Scourge had far more important things to worry about than the fate of an insignificant slave. The young man stood still and silent, knowing anything he said could only make things worse. Scourge turned and left the club. Once outside, he ducked around a nearby corner where he could watch the door. Seshel emerged a few minutes later and made his way quickly down the street. He didn't appear to be particularly worried or cautious. He had been expecting to hear from Murtagh, so he had no reason to be suspicious. Scourge followed him at a safe distance, careful not to draw attention to himself. Seshel didn't head back to Nyrus's stronghold. As Scourge expected, he had a private location where he could conduct business he didn't want others to know about. He continued for several blocks, then stopped at a small two-story apartment building in one of Kos City's residential districts. He punched in the security code to unlock the door and slipped inside. Scourge waited a few seconds, then approached the building. Glancing around to make sure there were no witnesses, he pulled out his lightsaber and ignited the blade, jamming it into the security panel. The lock sparked and sizzled, the circuits frying in an instant. A second later, the door slid open. As he'd suspected, the panel had been programmed to open the door if it malfunctioned, so the residents wouldn't be locked in or out of the apartment complex. The interior was little more than a hall giving access to the various apartments. There were 4 doors on the lower level, but Scourge ignored them. Seshel would never lower himself to rent a ground floor unit. There was no turbo lift, but in the back of the building there was a staircase leading up to the second level. Scourge made his way up. The suites on the top floor were obviously larger. Instead of 4 doors, there were only 2. Scourge picked one of the doors at random and pressed the buzzer. He waited for nearly a minute, but there was no reply. Either the unit wasn't occupied or the resident was not at home. He tried the buzzer on the other door. A few seconds later, he heard footsteps approaching. Then the door slid open. From Seshel's expression, it was clear he was caught off guard at finding Scourge instead of Murtagh waiting for him on the other side. Before he could react, Scourge jabbed out with his hand, driving his fingers into Seshel's throat. The other Sith dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Scourge stepped inside the apartment and closed the door behind him. Seshel struggled to speak, but all that came out was a rasping cough. Make any sound louder than a whisper, and your life will end in unbearable agony, Scourge warned him. The advisor held up his hand and nodded to show he understood. Scourge waited patiently for him to catch his breath. After a few minutes, Seshel had the strength to stand up. He brushed his clothes off, trying to compose himself. "Where is Murtagh?" he eventually asked, keeping his voice low. "Dead," Scourge replied. Seshel's eyes flickered wide for an instant, but otherwise he showed no reaction. "It seems I underestimated this woman," he said, his tone not in the least bit apologetic. "I assume, since you survived, that she now shares Murtagh's fate?" "How much did Nyrus know about the meeting?" Scourge demanded, ignoring Seshel's question. "Nothing. You didn't mention it to her?" Seshel sniffed indignantly. "You have an overly high opinion of yourself if you think Nyrus cares about some anonymous female from your past. This is beneath her notice." Scourge nodded. Seshel guarded his cards closely. He wouldn't mention anything to Nyrus until he had decided how best to turn the situation to his advantage. "What about Murtagh?" Scourge asked. "Would he say anything? Would he tell Nyrus where he was going?" "She doesn't keep tabs on us like children," Seshel sneered. "How long until she begins to miss him?" Scourge asked. You mean how long until she finds out you got him killed? Sechel mocked. I'd say you have another 3 days before she begins to wonder about his absence. 3 days, Scourge muttered. We'll have to move fast. What are you talking about? Sechel had obviously sensed Scourge's urgency. He must have assumed something had gone very, very wrong at the meeting. He thought Scourge was in trouble. He wrongly believed the Sith Lord had come here looking for help, and it was making him arrogant. Scourge decided it was time to clarify the situation. I want your files. What files? The ones implicating Nyrus and the other Dark Council members. I want everything you've gathered that could be used to expose them as traitors. To his credit, Sechel didn't deny the files existed. It would have been a pointless endeavor. Scourge knew him too well. The advisor was loyal to Nyrus, but his primary concern would always be for himself. If things ever went bad, he would need something to bargain with, and what better bargaining chip than detailed records of everything Nyrus and her co-conspirators had been involved in ever since they had started plotting against the Emperor. You're crossing a dangerous line, Sechel warned. Nyrus has turned a blind eye to my collection. I'm too valuable for her to cast me aside. You, however, are expendable. If she finds out about this, she'll have your head. Nyrus is not your concern. I am. Give me the files. I won't ask again. Sechel knew the lengths Scourge was willing to go in pursuit of information. The scars on his cheek reminded him every time he looked in a mirror, and this time he couldn't count on a timely interruption to put an end to the torture. Wait here, he said, turning and heading into the apartment. Scourge, who had no intention of letting Sechel out of his sight, followed right behind him. Sechel glanced back and sighed in resignation. He made his way to a small closet in the back of the apartment and slid the door open. At first glance, the closet appeared empty. Sechel dropped to one knee and slid back a small, hidden panel on the floor, revealing a security keypad. With Scourge watching closely over his shoulder, he punched in the access code. A panel in the back wall of the closet slid aside, revealing a hidden safe. Sechel punched another code into the keypad, and the door opened with an audible click. Slowly, Scourge warned. There's a blaster inside, Sechel confessed, but I have no intention of trying to use it against you. A wise decision. Sechel pulled gently on the corner of the safe's door, allowing it to swing wide and reveal the contents. As he had said, there was a small holdout blaster inside. There were also several data disks, each labeled with a date and arranged in chronological order. Is this everything? Scourge demanded. It's all here, Sechel assured him, but it's encrypted. If anything happens to me, the data is useless. I'm the only one who can decode it. Scourge had no way to tell if Sechel was bluffing, but he was willing to take the risk. I'm sure I can find a slicer somewhere who's up to the challenge, he said, stepping in close behind him. He brought his left arm up and under Sechel's chin, the forearm pressing hard on his windpipe. At the same time, his right hand reached around and gripped the top of Sechel's head. Sechel had become a liability. Scourge couldn't leave him behind, and taking him with him was far more trouble than it was worth. The smaller Sith struggled to break the hold as Scourge began to apply pressure to the vertebrae in his neck. There were literally hundreds of ways he could have killed Sechel, but given their history, he wanted their final moments to be up close and personal. Sechel tried to kick him, but Scourge had positioned himself so that the flailing foot of the other Sith only struck feebly against his thigh. He took a deep breath, braced his left arm, and yanked hard with his right hand. There was a surprisingly loud pop, and Sechel's body spasmed once before going completely limp. Releasing his grip to let the body slump to the floor, Scourge gathered up the data disks and left the apartment, the door automatically sliding shut behind him. Okay. Mitra sat still and silent on the floor of the cave, her legs crossed and her hands held at chest height, palms facing each other. She had opened herself up to the Force, looking for guidance and wisdom, but here on Droman Kaas, where the dark side prevailed, it was difficult to find the inner tranquility necessary for enlightenment. Having T3 running long, nervous circles around her certainly didn't help, but she was afraid if she told him to stay still, he might have a meltdown, and she understood the droid's anxiety. She still wasn't sure what to make of Lord Scourge. She had sensed that his offer to work together was sincere, though she wondered how much of that was Revan's doing. It was easy to understand how Scourge could be drawn to him. Revan's command of the Force was greater than that of anyone else she had ever met, and she knew how charismatic he could be. Even though he was a prisoner, it wasn't hard to imagine him being in total control of the situation. But if he had recruited Scourge as an ally, he had it had been out of necessity rather than choice. The Sith was wholly consumed by the dark side. He had no respect for life, no desire to serve any needs but his own. Even if what he said about wanting to stop the Emperor was true, his motivations were survival and self-preservation. She didn't trust him, but if he could prove that he and Revan were on the same side, she would work with him. The risk of betrayal was one she was willing to take if it gave her a chance to rescue her friend. The little droid was passing by her on one of his many, many laps when she heard the sound of a speeder approaching. T3 stopped and dimmed his light, casting the cave in shadow once more. "I told you he'd be back," Mitra said. "He's alone," she added before T3 could ask the obvious question. She scrambled to her feet as Lord Scourge marched confidently into the cave, ready to respond at the first hint of aggression. "I have what you need," he said, holding up several data disks. "This will prove what I said about trying to stop the Emperor. You will see that we are on the same side." Scourge stepped forward and extended his hand, offering her the disks. She hesitated for only a moment before coming close enough to take them from his grasp. She returned to T3, carefully retracing her steps so as not to turn her back on the red-skinned Sith. "We'll need time to look these over," she said. "They might be encrypted," Scourge told her. "I've never come across a code my friend here couldn't crack," she said, and T3 beeped his agreement. "I suspected as much. How long do you think it will take?" "Why, are you in a rush?" "Events have been set in motion," he explained. "We have 2, maybe 3 days before the window of opportunity closes." "Work fast, T3, she said. She looked up at Scourge. "We'd be more comfortable if you weren't hovering over us." "I will return in 3 hours," he said. "Alone, of course." It only took half that time for T3 to decrypt and verify the authenticity of the data. As promised, it confirmed that what the Sith had said. He really was plotting to overthrow the Emperor. However, it wasn't just Scourge. Several members of the Dark Council, the Emperor's circle of hand-picked advisors, had joined together in a conspiracy to remove him from the throne. Yet after more than a decade, they had made no real progress. Instead, the discs cataloged a litany of power plays and double crosses among the various leaders of the conspiracy. They spent so much time plotting against one another that the idea of them actually working together to defeat the Emperor seemed ludicrous. "No wonder he's willing to work with Revan," Mitra muttered. "He's just sick of waiting." By the time Scourge returned, she had made her decision. "I believe you," she said. "I'm ready to work together." "Does this mean you'll tell me your name?" the Sith asked. "I'm Mitra, and this is T3M4. The droid let out a shrill chirp. "What's he saying?" Scourge asked. "He says it's time for you to take us to see Revan." "The situation has changed. That isn't an option any longer." "Why not?" "He says it's time for you to... Oh. He is being held by a Sith Lord called Nyrus. She's on the Dark Council," Mitra said, recalling the name from the data disks. "She's the one who brought you into the conspiracy." Scourge nodded. "If she's holding Revan, why can't you take us to him?" "When I first made the offer, I was hoping Revan could convince you that we should work together," Scourge explained. "Going to see him now would only be an unnecessary risk." "I don't understand." "I could probably get you in to see him, but that won't help get him out of his cell, and it might raise suspicion." "Just take me to him," Mitra insisted. "Leave the escape to me." You can't fight your way through Nyrus's entire army of followers, Scourge said, even with my help. She has hundreds of guards and dozens of acolytes trained in the dark side. If we're going to break Revan out, we need a distraction, something to draw the attention of the guards away while we sneak in. I assume you have a plan? I do, Scourge said, smiling. I'm going to get the Emperor to help us. Okay, and that is the end of that chapter, so we'll jump straight on into 23. Though he appeared calm on the outside, Scourge's heart was pounding as he mounted the steps to the Emperor's citadel. He was playing a dangerous game, but there were no other options. Time was the enemy. If they had any hope of getting Revan out of her dungeon alive, they had to act before Nyrus realized Scourge had betrayed her. Soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe even today, Nyrus would begin to wonder about Seshel and Murtagh's absence. It wouldn't take her long to learn that they had been working with Scourge, and from there she would easily fill in the blanks. He'd briefly considered approaching one of the other members of the Dark Council, hoping to convince him or her to help him get rid of Nyrus, the same way she had used him to eliminate Darth Zedrix. But even if they agreed to help him, it would be weeks before they put a plan into place. Like Nyrus, they were too cautious, too afraid, to take any action that might put them at risk. The Emperor was the only Sith on all of Dromund Kaas with the will to take the kind of quick and decisive action required. Convincing him that Nyrus was a traitor would be simple enough with the files he'd acquired from Seshel. The trick was making the Emperor believe Scourge had been an unknowing pawn in her plans. T3 had doctored the data disks, removing all evidence of Scourge's part in the conspiracy. Scourge would claim that he came forward as soon as he learned of the plot, but there was no guarantee the Emperor would believe him. Scourge was going to present the evidence in person. If the Emperor suspected he was lying, or if he was simply powerful enough to see the truth, escape would be impossible. He was putting himself at great risk for the sake of the cause, something he never would have considered before he met Revan. At the top of the stairs, he was stopped by a pair of Sith soldiers clad in red armor, two of the famed Imperial Guard. An army of elite warriors, the Imperial Guard underwent months of brutal training to transform them into the most disciplined and deadly troops in the Empire. Many didn't survive, but those who did emerged as fanatically loyal zealots, willing to sacrifice their lives to defend the Emperor. State your business, one of the guards said, barring his way with a heavy electro-staff. I must see the Emperor immediately. He didn't know what kind of reaction his bold statement would produce. Mocking laughter or flat refusal were the most likely options. Only those on the Dark Council can speak with the Emperor, the second soldier told him, her tone curt and official. My name is Lord Scourge. I serve Darth Nyrus. I am here on her behalf. The soldiers looked at each other, and he sensed their uncertainty. The Emperor is in danger, Scourge insisted. I must speak with him. Wait here, the male guard told him. He disappeared inside the citadel and didn't return for several minutes. The entire time passed in silence. The remaining guards saw no reason to speak to Scourge, and he knew better than to say anything more to her. Simple lies were the most effective, and Scourge had no intention of saying anything more than was absolutely necessary. When the first soldier emerged, he was accompanied by four more of his comrades. All were Sith, and 3 wore uniforms identical to those of the guards stationed at the door. The 4th was also clad in red armor, but her outfit was more elaborate. I am Captain Yari, she told him. Come with me. They left the original 2 guards behind as she led him into the citadel. She walked in front of him while 2 of the newcomers flanked him. The 4th fell into line directly behind him so that he was completely surrounded. The design of the citadel reminded Scourge of Nyrus's stronghold, but not surprising given that she had built her edifice in the same style to honor the Emperor. The interior was a virtual maze of corridors with gray and forbidding stone walls, punctuated by heavy wooden doors leading off to antechambers and side rooms. However, where Nyrus lined the halls with statues, busts, and wall hangings glorifying her reputation and achievements, the decor of the citadel was far more utilitarian. Statues were few and far between, and the few splashes of color in the scattered wall hangings were muted by the dim lighting that cast everything in shadow. "You are taking me to the Emperor?" Scourge asked. "You may speak with one of the Emperor's advisors." "Unacceptable. I did not come to meet with a servant." "The choice is not yours to make," Captain Yari replied brusquely. Scourge stopped in his tracks, causing the soldier walking behind him to stumble into him. The Sith Lord angrily shoved him back. In response, the two guards who had been at his side whipped out their electrostaffs. "Stop!" Captain Yari shouted, and they froze in their tracks. "I am a Lord of the Sith," Scourge reminded him, and an agent of Darth Nyrus. I order you to take me to the Emperor." "That is not permitted. These are exceptional circumstances." "How so?" "That is for the Emperor's ears alone. I must speak to him in person." "The Emperor does not like to be disturbed. He will want to hear what I have to say." If he feels you've wasted his time, you will be punished," the captain warned. The calm, almost casual way she spoke the simple threat was far more effective than providing gruesome details, but Scourge wasn't about to back down now. "It will not be a waste of his time." The captain considered the request, then nodded. "As you wish." As she led him down the twisting corridors of the citadel, Scourge made a mental note of their path. When he and Revan finally struck at the Emperor, they would need to know as much of the layout of the citadel as possible. Eventually, they turned down a hall that terminated in a pair of large durasteel doors. "The throne room lies beyond," Captain Yari told him. "There you will find the Emperor." She turned to face him. "I will give you one last chance to reconsider." "I've made my decision." "Then you must proceed alone. I will not violate the sanctity of the throne room." She motioned with her hand, and the two soldiers stepped forward, one by each of the massive doors. Grunting with exertion, they pushed the doors inward. Then they stepped to the side, standing at attention, with their backs against the wall, just outside the throne room's now open entrance. Scourge expected them to search him, or at least instruct him to turn over his weapons, but Yari and the others simply stood at attention, waiting for him to enter. The fact that they showed no concern over letting an armed Sith Lord speak to the Emperor face to face, without any kind of preparation, was a testament to the Emperor's unfathomable power. Thinking about that power gave Scourge pause. Like Revan, the Emperor understood the Force in ways Scourge never would. It was possible he experienced the same kind of visions as a Jedi. It was also possible he could peer into Scourge's mind and instantly know the truth of everything he was saying. Meeting him face to face would be tantamount to suicide. Could be tantamount to suicide. No, Scourge thought. If that were the case, he would have sensed Nyrus's betrayal long ago. As powerful as the Emperor might be, he was not omniscient. He was, however, intelligent and cunning enough to have held on to his throne for over 1,000 years, an unprecedented reign among the conniving and cutthroat politics of the Sith. Which meant Scourge would have to be very careful not to say anything that might give him away. Captain Yari and the other guards were still patiently waiting. No doubt they were used to seeing this kind of hesitation in those who were about to meet the Emperor. Steeling himself, Scourge stepped inside. The throne room was enormous, 20 meters wide and at least 40 meters long, with an arched ceiling that rose 15 meters above. Apart from the throne at the far end, it was virtually empty. The throne sat on an elevated circular pedestal, several meters in diameter. As Scourge walked forward, he noticed that the throne was facing away from him, its high back effectively blocking any view of its occupant. After a few more steps, the pedestal swiveled around, turning the throne so that it faced him, and for the first time in his life, Scourge set eyes upon the Emperor. The figure before him appeared unremarkable. The Emperor was clad in unadorned black robes, the raised hood effectively hiding his face. Yet Scourge could feel the power of the dark side emanating from him with such intensity that it caused a faint rippling of the air. The Emperor rose to his feet, and the Durasteel steel doors swung shut behind Scourge with a booming crash. Scourge's step faltered briefly at the sound, but he continued forward. As he reached the foot of the pedestal, he dropped to one knee, bowing low, his eyes focused on a spot on the ground in front of him. "Rise, Lord Scourge," the Emperor told him, "and speak your piece." Scourge stood up to address the Sith looming above him. The Emperor had thrown back his hood to reveal his face. His eyes were as black as the void itself. Staring into the hollow darkness of the Emperor's gaze, Scourge's mind flashed back to Nathema, and he shivered at the memory. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His mouth was suddenly so dry he felt as if he might choke. He swallowed hard and coughed, finally bringing up enough saliva to talk. 3 years ago I went to serve Darth Nyrus at your request, Scourge began. I discovered that Darth Zedrix was a traitor. He had allied himself with separatists to kill Nyrus, and I executed him for his crimes. Your service has been noted, the Emperor assured him. There was something strange about the Emperor's voice. It didn't sound like the voice of a single being. It had an unusual echo and resonance, almost as if a great multitude were speaking his words in perfect symphony. A grim theory passed unbidden through Scourge's mind. Was it possible all those that had been consumed by the ritual on Nathema still existed in some form within the Emperor himself? Nyrus said he'd devoured them, but what if she was only partially correct? What if he had imprisoned their spirits inside his own corporeal form, slowly feeding on their life energy over 1,000 years to keep himself young and strong? Scourge pushed such thoughts away. He needed to focus. One wrong word and the Emperor might see through his lies. I continued to serve Darth Nyrus after Zedrix's death, Scourge explained, and I continued to investigate the separatists. He paused, waiting for the Emperor to ask what he'd found. After a few seconds, he realized the inquiry was not coming. I became suspicious of one of Nyrus's advisors, a man named Seshel. I turned the focus of my investigation to him, but Seshel was careful. He covered his tracks well. It took me until yesterday before I was certain of his guilt. He was also secretly working with the Separatists, and he suffered the same fate as Zedrix. You should speak to Darth Nyrus if you seek to be rewarded for your actions, the Emperor said. There was no change in his tone, but the implied threat was clear. This is beneath me, and you are wasting my time. Scourge swallowed hard, his mouth dry once more. That is not why I have come before you. Among Seshel's effects I found these data files. He held up the discs. They show that Darth Zedrix was not the only member of the Dark Council to betray you. He was merely sacrificed to keep the involvement of the others secret. Darth Nyrus was also involved in the plot, along with several others. The Emperor had no physical reaction to the revelation. He stayed as still and calm as death itself, but the air around Scourge seemed to grow colder. Are you certain of these accusations? I would stake my life on them, my Lord Emperor. You already have. Scourge felt a shiver trace its way down his spine, and he knew that far more than his life was at risk. The Emperor was no longer a member of the Sith species. His power and immortality had transformed him into a being unique in the galaxy. When he spoke of life and death, it had far deeper meaning than the mere physical existence of the lesser beings that served him. Does Nyrus know you are here? No. I came to you as soon as I deciphered the data on Seshel's discs. There was a long silence, and Scourge had the distinct impression that the Emperor was somehow communicating with someone outside the room. A few seconds later, the door to the throne room opened, and Captain Yari strode in, accompanied by a Sith wearing the same dark robes as the Emperor. They approached Scourge, and the robed Sith held out his hand expectantly. Scourge handed him the discs. Keep Lord Scourge in custody until this matter is settled, the Emperor intoned. Forgive me, Lord Emperor, Scourge said, speaking quickly, but trying to keep his tone humble. But Nyrus is expecting my return. If I am absent, she will grow suspicious. The Emperor's dark eyes seemed to flicker with annoyance, and Scourge feared he had gone too far. The best he could hope for as punishment for his insolence would be a quick and relatively painless death. However, when the Emperor spoke again, it was not to pass judgment on him. You were bold to speak to me in this way, he stated, and because you are right, I will reward your initiative this time. When Nyrus falls, you will be first in line for his seat on the Dark Council. Thank you, Lord Emperor, Scourge said, with a bow. If your information proves false, however, the Emperor nodded, you will suffer a fate more terrible than anything you can imagine. As he spoke, the dark circles of his eyes seemed to fill with a swirling red mist, and for a brief instant the Emperor gave Scourge a glimpse of his true self. Scourge cried out in anguish as the Emperor's mind brushed against his. Then he collapsed to the floor, shaking like a child. The touch lasted less than a second, but in that time he witnessed indescribable horrors that dwarfed anything the dark side could conjure even in his worst nightmares. And beneath the formless terrors lurked the unbearable void, the pure emptiness of total annihilation. It was over as quickly as it had begun, the awful vision retreating into his subconscious like a repressed memory, as Scourge picked himself up off the floor. Neither Captain Yari nor the robed Sith made any move to help him. Come with me, the captain said, once he was on his feet. Only then did Scourge notice that the Emperor had retaken his seat on the throne, and that the pedestal had spun around to face away from him. The dark-robed Sith stayed behind as Yari led Scourge out of the throne room and into the hall beyond. I see why you tried to talk me out of this, Scourge muttered, as they made their way back toward the Citadel's main entrance. You took a great risk, Yari said, though it was hard to tell if she thought him admirable or foolish. But if your information is good, it sounds like you'll be on the Dark Council the next time we meet. What about Nyrus? Scourge asked. What will the Emperor do to her? She will be purged by the Imperial Guard, Yari said, along with her entire staff of followers. I'd rather not be there when it happens, Scourge said. When will you make your move? Soon, the captain said. For now, return to Nyrus so she doesn't grow suspicious. They had reached the top of the staircase leading down from the Citadel's entrance to the street below. I will tell my people not to harm you, Captain Yari promised before turning away. Just before she disappeared into the Citadel, she added, but when the battle starts, try to stay out of the way, just in case. And that's the end of chapter 23. So, one more. Chapter 24. Mitra didn't like the idea of pretending to be Scourge's newly purchased slave, but the Sith had assured her it was the best way for her to infiltrate Nyrus' stronghold without drawing unwanted attention. To complete the ruse, she had changed her functional pants and top for a revealing purple outfit more suited to a dancer in one of the low-rent clubs she'd frequented during her days as a mercenary. The tight-fitting clothes left her arms and midriff bare, but an excess of exposed skin wasn't the worst part of the disguise. Scourge had also insisted she wear a slave's shock collar around her neck. It was non-functional, of course. She'd had T3 carefully inspect it to make sure, but she still rankled at the idea of adorning herself with a symbol so closely linked to the galaxy's most vile practice. However, as distasteful as it was, she knew Scourge was right. Every slave on Droman Kos was forced to wear the collar. Without it, no one would believe their story. T3 was accompanying them as well, similarly equipped with a non-functioning restraining bolt. Welcome back, Lord Scourge, a guard stationed just inside the main entrance said as the trio passed by. Darth Nyrus was just asking about you. In what regard? The Sith asked, as Mitra struggled to hide her interest. Seshel and Murtagh both left 2 days ago. She wondered if you knew where they'd gone. They didn't include me in their plans, Scourge said with a shrug. I've been scouring the slave markets for the past few days, looking for a worthy purchase. Of course, my lord, the guard said with a slight bow. He snuck a quick peek at Mitra, a knowing glint in his eye, and a faint smile on his lips, before turning his attention back to Lord Scourge. I will inform Darth Nyrus that you have not seen the others, he said. Good. Once I am settled, I will go speak with her myself, to see if she wants me to inquire about them, after them. He turned on his heel, dismissing the underling as he continued down the hall with long, quick strides. Mitra and T3 scrambled to keep pace, staying a respectful 2 steps behind their supposed owner. Once they were out of sight and earshot of the guard, Scourge stopped and turned to address them. This could complicate things, he said. Nyrus wouldn't have asked after the others if she wasn't growing concerned. I had hoped to avoid her until the Emperor made his move, but if I put off seeing her now, it will look suspicious. Scourge had spoken to the Emperor just that morning. Mitra imagined it would take at least another day or 2 before he assembled his forces to strike at Nyrus. I'm not letting you out of my sight, she warned him. If you meet with her, T3 and I had better go with you. Ridiculous, Scourge spat. I would never be so insulting as to bring one of my personal slaves into a meeting with someone of Nyrus's rank. Then you'd better think of something fast, Mitra said, because if this all goes sour, I'm going to whip out my lightsaber and start chopping off heads. I could bring you if I was presenting you to Nyrus as a gift, Scourge said, but then there would be no reason for me to keep you close by. Forget it, Mitra snarled. T3 echoed her sentiment with a shrill squawk. Then what do you suggest? Scourge demanded. Take me to Revan now. I'll take my chances on fighting our way out. I didn't bring you here so you could throw your life away, and I have no intention of becoming a martyr. Mitra was about to fire back another angry retort when the stronghold was rocked to its foundations by a very loud explosion coming from somewhere off to the east. The Imperial Guard, Scourge gasped. They're here. Alarms began to ring through the corridor, mingling with the sounds of shouting and running feet as Nyrus's people responded to the sudden attack. Mitra reached up and yanked the slave collar from her neck, hurling it across the floor. T3 mimicked her by popping off his restraining bolt. The dungeon is this way, Scourge said, quickly putting their now pointless argument behind them. Follow me. The explosions continued as he led them through the twisting passages. They were coming from all sides. Obviously, the Imperial Guard had the entire stronghold surrounded. Based on the frequency and size of the distant explosions, Mitra guessed they were using an artillery assault to try to breach the walls at multiple locations. Males and females ran past them in both directions, some rushing to join the fray and others scrambling to safety. The unexpected attack had caught Nyrus's people completely off guard. They were in disarray, their efforts to defend the stronghold uncoordinated and disorganized. I would have expected someone on the Dark Council to put up better resistance, Mitra said as they turned a corner and raced down another hall. The security chief and 3 of his top lieutenants aren't here to rally them, thanks to you, he reminded her. They rounded another corner and confronted the first real sign of any kind of counterattack. 8 soldiers led by a lightsaber-wielding Sith acolyte had taken up positions in the corridor roughly 10 meters away from the large, smoking hole in the wall. As the smoke cleared, dozens of red-uniformed soldiers poured through the breach, armed with blaster rifles and electrostaffs. Nyrus's people opened fire, mowing down the first wave. Those in the ranks behind never even slowed. Driven forward by their furious devotion to the Emperor, they charged the enemy line with a reckless disregard for their own safety. Had the defenders held their ground and continued to fire, they might have survived several more waves, but their morale was shaken by the berserker mentality of their attackers. So instead they broke ranks and tried to flee. None of them succeeded. 3 were taken down by blaster fire, shot in the back as they turned to run. The other 5, including the acolyte with the lightsaber, were swallowed up by a sea of red-uniformed guards and smashed down with electrostaffs. The entire incident took less than 10 seconds, plenty of time for Scourge to lead Mitra and T3 in another direction. But instead of trying to avoid the melee, the Sith had simply held his ground and watched. As the last defender fell, the invaders broke into two teams and set off in opposite directions down the hall. The chance to hide until they passed was lost. As the red-robed butchers approached, Mitra started to reach for the lightsaber hidden inside her black, knee-high leather boot. Scourge grabbed her wrist and shook his head. He stepped back against the wall, dragging her with him. Recognizing Scourge as a friendly target, the Imperial guards ran past without even a second glance. "The dungeons are close," Scourge told her once they were alone again. They were fortunate enough not to encounter any more battles for the rest of the journey, though they came across the aftermath of several violent skirmishes. Some of the bodies wore the red uniforms of the invaders, but for every one of them, there were at least 5 of Nyrus's people. Security guards, acolytes, and even civilian staff lay strewn about the halls and corridors. The Emperor's guard had spared no one. Mitra understood there had been no other way to free Revan, but she still felt revulsion at the wholesale slaughter. When she noticed the body of a young Twi'lek slave lying on the floor with her throat cut, she forced herself to look away. "Nyrus's personal attendant," Scourge noted, "but I don't see Nyrus among the dead." T3 beeped and Mitra shook her head. "I don't think she escaped," she said, remembering the ruthless efficiency and organization of the attacking troops. "Her fate is irrelevant," Scourge declared. "Right. Take us to Revan." They rounded a final corner, bringing them face to face with a massive durasteel door. Scourge stepped up and punched in a security code, but the door didn't open. He tried again, and the pad responded with a sharp buzz. "The whole place is in emergency lockdown," he said. "My security codes won't work." "Don't worry," Mitra said confidently. "T3 can slice through any security system." "He'd better hurry," Scourge said. "I don't sense guards on the other side of the door. You think they fled?" He shook his head. "I think when the alarms went off, Nyrus told them to execute the prisoner." At first, Revan thought the distant explosions were an unusual side effect of some new drug combination his captors were trying on him. But when the alarms started blaring, his addled mind realized the facility was under attack. "Mitra," he mumbled. He struggled to his feet, battling the mind-numbing effects of the chemicals coursing through his veins. Had his mind been able to focus, he could have purged them from his system, but of course the entire point of the drugs was to keep him from drawing on the Force. A few seconds later, he heard someone outside the door of the cell. When the door opened, he expected to see Scourge, but instead, he found himself faced with an unfamiliar guard. The young man was a dark-skinned human. He was holding a blaster out at arm's length, pointing it at Revan. His hand was visibly trembling. From outside, another voice shouted, "Hurry! Do it!" Even in Revan's clouded state, the situation was obvious. In the wake of the attack, someone had ordered them to kill the prisoner. "Squeeze the trigger, it'll be the last action you ever take," Revan warned. "Come on," the other voice said. "Just do it. What's the problem?" "Shut up!" the young man shouted to his hidden companion. "You were too scared to even open the cell." Their fear was completely understandable. Since his incarceration, Revan had been held under strict quarantine. Nobody had been given access to his cell without Scourge being present, and even then the Sith had mostly come to see him alone. No doubt it had been drilled into the guards' heads over and over how powerful and dangerous the prisoner was. They'd been warned against having any dealings with him whatsoever. His mysterious reputation built up over years of speculation and rumors among his jailers. "Set the weapon down if you want to live," Revan told the young man. Through the veil of drugs, he strained to reach out with the Force, amplifying the other's fear and confusion. "No!" his friend shouted above the piercing alarms, still staying hidden around the corner. "He'll kill us!" "I promise to spare you," Revan said. "I give you my word as a Jedi." "See? See?" the man with the gun squealed. "I told you he was a Jedi." "Nyrus has sent you on a suicide mission," Revan told them. How do you know who we work for? The man barked, the pitch of his voice rising. The Force shows me many things. Another explosion from above, this one much closer, caused the guard to nearly drop his weapon. He fumbled it briefly before seizing it with both hands and quickly bringing it up again to point at Revan. Revan briefly contemplated making a grab for the blaster, but the drugs slowed him physically as much as mentally. Instead, he remained still and calm. "This is bad," the young man said, squeezing the blaster's handle so hard that his knuckles were becoming discolored. "This is bad." "Just walk away from all this," Revan told them. "It's your only real chance of survival." "We can't walk away," the guard moaned. "The door upstairs won't open. We're locked in." "Just shoot him," his friend shouted. "He can't hurt you. If he was going to stop you, he would have done it by now." There were several seconds of silence, punctuated by the alarms and another series of explosions in rapid succession. "Nyrus will kill us if she finds us down here with you still alive," the man with the blaster said, his voice almost apologetic. "Nyrus is already dead," Revan said, trying a different tactic as he tried to apply even more pressure through the Force. "Do you hear the explosions, the alarms? My friends are coming to liberate me." "You say you're trapped in here? What do you think my friends will do if they find you standing over my corpse?" "He's got a point," the unseen speaker said reluctantly. "Listen to all those bombs going off. This isn't just some quick hit-and-run attack." "Surrender to me, and I will guarantee your safety," Revan said. "I give you my word as a Jedi." The young man's head turned quickly back and forth from Revan to his friend outside the cell, and then back to Revan again. Then he dropped the blaster as if it were on fire. Revan calmly stepped out of the cell and got his first look at the other guard, another human male, perhaps a few years older than the first. Both guards were frozen with fear, watching his every move intently. Each time the alarm whooped overhead, they flinched. "I will not harm you," Revan assured them. Both men seemed to relax a little, and Revan tried to project calm, soothing waves through the Force to further ease their minds. "Sit down over there against the wall until my friends arrive," he suggested. "You don't want them to mistake you for a threat." Seeing the wisdom of his words, both men scrambled to follow his instructions. Several minutes later, they heard a loud crash from above, followed by the sound of footsteps racing down the steep stairs. And then Mitra descended into view, dressed in some type of dancer's outfit. Seeing Revan, her face broke into a wide grin. "I knew I'd find you," she said, rushing over to embrace him fiercely. "It's been a long time," Revan whispered, wrapping his arms around her. After a moment she broke the embrace, and Revan noticed her nose had wrinkled up against the powerful odor wafting off him. "A real long time," he said with an apologetic shrug, eliciting a soft laugh from Mitra. "A touching reunion," a familiar voice said. "Lord Scourge!" one of the guards shrieked in terror. Revan spun Mitra to the side and stepped in front of her, an instinctive but foolish move. Mitra was a Jedi. She knew how to handle herself, and unarmed he was no match for the Sith. "It's okay," Mitra said, placing a hand on Revan's shoulder. "Scourge is here to help us." It took Revan's foggy mind a moment to process what she was saying. Once he figured it out, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. "So I finally get to learn your name," he said. "Scourge. No wonder you didn't want to tell me." "Make jokes once we're safely away from here," Scourge said. "He's right," Mitra told him. "T3's keeping watch at the top of the stairs. Come on." "Go ahead," the Sith told them, drawing his lightsaber and approaching the guards cowering on the floor. "I'll take care of the witnesses." "No," Revan said. "I promised to protect them." Scourge gave him a look of utter disbelief. "It's going to be hard enough to get out of here without escorting these pathetic excuses for soldiers." "I gave them my word," Revan said. A rush of dizziness swept over him, and he reeled. "What's wrong?" Mitra asked, reaching out to catch him before he fell. "They keep me drugged," Revan said. "I just need a minute." With Mitra's help, he lowered himself to the floor. His heart was pounding and his head was spinning. During the confrontation with the guard, he must have instinctively used the force to keep the worst of the drug's effects at bay, but he wasn't strong enough to keep it up any longer, and now his body was responding with an acute overreaction. Scourge stepped over to the med kit on the wall and yanked it open. He grabbed a hypodermic filled with a green luminescent fluid. "This will help," he said, injecting it into Revan's arm, "but it will take a few minutes." "I have something else," Mitra told him. "Bastila asked me to give it to you." She nodded at Scourge, who pulled a package from the large pouch on his hip. He tossed it to Revan, who didn't even try to catch it, but just picked it up off the floor. The object was wrapped in cloth. It was clearly metal, and there was something oddly familiar about it. "You spoke with Bastila?" he asked. "You saw her?" Mitra nodded. "And your son. They're both well." Revan smiled. His mind felt like it was floating blissfully away, but he wasn't sure if the euphoria was triggered by thoughts of his family or the drugs still working their way out of his system. He opened the cloth to reveal the masked helmet he had worn during his campaigns against the Mandalorians and the Republic. In an instant, all his lost memories came flooding back to him. A million images, years upon years of forgotten people, places, and events, flooded his consciousness simultaneously. In his weakened state, it was too much to take. As his brain went into sensory overload, his body went limp. "What's happening?" Scourge demanded as Revan collapsed on the floor. I don't know," Mitra said, her hands fumbling to check Revan's pulse as he lay motionless on the ground. His eyes were closed, but the lids were fluttering madly. Otherwise, he was completely still. From the stairs, T3 let out a piercing wail, several octaves higher than the incessant alarms. "Someone's coming," Mitra said. Scourge turned to the guards still sitting on the floor. "Ready your blasters, you fools," he shouted. As they scrambled to their feet, T3 let out what could only be described as a shriek of terror. An instant later, the little astromech came tumbling down the stairs and bounced across the floor as if he had been shot from a cannon. He landed in the corner on his back, his wheels still spinning. "Get Revan out of the way," Scourge said to Mitra. As she dragged the Jedi's unconscious body into the nearby cell, one of the guards drew his weapon, while the other rushed over and picked his discarded blaster up from where Revan had kicked it aside. Scourge nodded at the guards in response to his silent command. They crept to the foot of the stairs and peered up toward the door above. A burst of purple lightning arced down the steps, catching both men in the chest. They barely had time to scream before they were turned into charred and smoking husks. Scourge took a step back, knowing exactly who had been responsible for unleashing the fury of the dark side against the hapless guards. Nyrus made her way slowly down the stairs, the outspread fingers of her left hand still crackling with electricity. In her right hand she held her lightsaber, the blade humming softly. By the time she reached the bottom, Mitra had emerged from the nearby cell. She ignited her lightsaber and came to stand beside Scourge. "What's this?" Nyrus asked, her voice mocking. "Another Jedi?" When neither of them answered, she turned her head to the side and laughed bitterly. "The Imperial Guard will make sure I never leave my stronghold alive," she told them, "but neither will any of you." She raised her free hand above her head and fired off another burst of lightning. Both Scourge and Mitra threw themselves clear of the deadly electrical bolt, but in doing so they gave Nyrus the early advantage. Before they could recover, she leapt at them. Despite her withered appearance, she moved with all the speed and ferocity of a dark-side warrior in her prime. She landed right between her two adversaries, her blade flashing back and forth in a series of slashes and cuts that immediately threw her two opponents on the defensive. Scourge barely managed to parry the first wave of her assault, unable to even think about countering with an attack of his own. Another quick thrust forced him off balance, and he staggered backward. Nyrus seized on the opportunity to focus all her efforts on breaking through Mitra's defenses. The Jedi was clearly overmatched, though she managed to hold her ground. She was forced down to one knee. In the awkward position, her right flank was exposed, and Nyrus brought her blade in to deliver a crippling cut. At the same time, Scourge lashed out with the force, catching Nyrus flush in the center of her chest. An ordinary foe would have been thrown clear across the room, but Nyrus instinctively threw up a force barrier to protect herself, absorbing and redirecting the brunt of the impact. Even so, Scourge's attack knocked her off balance just enough to send her lightsaber wide of the mark, giving Mitra the opportunity she needed to scramble away to safety. Scourge rushed forward, hoping to drive Nyrus back into a corner, but she met his charge with an invisible wave of rippling energy. It picked Scourge up and tossed him head over heels, sending him crashing to the wall. Dazed, he looked up just in time to see another bolt of violet lightning catch Mitra in the chest. Like Nyrus, she threw up a barrier to save herself from the worst of it, but she was still knocked from her feet. "Did you think I would be as easy to defeat as Zedrix?" Nyrus shouted, raising her lightsaber triumphantly above her head. The air around her began to crackle and grow hot as she gathered herself for the killing blow. Scourge felt the energy building inside her, and he knew he would be powerless to stop it. Nyrus was too powerful. Her command of the dark side was too strong. "Gaze upon me and see your doom," she declared. "I am Darth Nyrus, Lord of the Sith. I am the conqueror of Drezi, the destroyer of Meldia, and a member of the Dark Council." Scourge braced himself for the end. Just then, Revan emerged from the cell. He had pulled the hood of his Jedi robe up to cover his head, and he wore the red and gray mask hiding his face. A dozen bolts of lightning sprang from Nyrus's hand, arcing across the room to incinerate her enemies. Instead of leaping back into the cell to avoid the deadly attack, Revan stepped forward to intercept it. Both hands were held in front of him, his arms fully extended at shoulder height, his thumbs touching and his fingers splayed wide. He drew the bolts of lightning into his waiting grasp, channeling them away from their intended targets and absorbing their power. "I am Revan reborn," he said to Nyrus, "and before me you are nothing." Nyrus's eyes went wide as Revan unleashed the power of her own attack against her. She tried to throw up another force shield, but the bolts ripped it apart and continued on unabated. The lightning engulfed her, the intense heat consuming her instantly, leaving only a pile of charred ash. Scourge slowly clambered to his feet as Revan helped Mitra up. In the corner, the upended astromech let out a plaintive whistle and awkwardly managed to rock himself back into an upright position. Revan walked over and knelt beside the closer of the two dead soldiers. He placed a hand on the man's chest, but didn't speak. "We have to go," Mitra said softly, coming over and gently touching Revan on the shoulder to interrupt his thoughts. "We don't want the Imperial Guard to know you were here." He stood up and slowly turned to Scourge. There was something unnerving about staring into the faceless mask. It made Revan seem more intimidating, more powerful. Or maybe Scourge just felt that way because he'd watched him destroy Nyrus. Whatever the reason, he was more confident than ever that he'd made the right choice. If anyone had the strength to stop the Emperor, it was this man. "This is yours," the Sith said, taking the hilt of Revan's lightsaber from his belt. Revan accepted the gift with a brief nod, then simply said, "Get us out of here." And that's the end of that chapter. So, we got to see a little taste of Revan's power. So, that will be that for this session. No, that wasn't bad. Just over an hour and 10. So I am going to game here in just a little bit. So I will not raid anybody right this moment. I'll raid later. So come on back. See you in a little bit.
My heart is beating. I know the easiest response because I have seen the bar. I have known so bother play. I didn't anything to say. Follow your heart, don't take. If you leave it behind, someone will bring. I left you my heart. What did you do? You still you let me shy. Was my love? Was it love? You have no